When I was growing up, I always wanted to be a boy, even from the age of 3, and I often gave myself different boys' names, right into my 20s, in fact. And it took a long time for me to accept that I was a woman. So why would a girl want to be a boy? Partly because of timeless things like the fact that boys are regarded more highly in society and have more independence and are generally deferred to more. And whereas aspects of femininity are associated with being pretty and weak and vulnerable and things that a strong teenage girl doesn't want to be. I always loathed femininity, makeup, dresses, especially silly shoes which are uncomfortable and you can't run in. I never understood why girls wanted to dress themselves up as flowers instead of being robust, strong, powerful individuals in society. I always felt I wanted to be a strong person in society and to move about easily, wear comfortable clothes, and be someone who was seen and listened to in society. And that seemed to mean that I should be male. So that is one of the reasons why I feel so passionately now that lesbians growing up, or girls that so don't conform to feminine stereotypes, should not be given puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones or what, because I'm sure that if I had been growing up now, that's what I would have wanted. I would have leapt at it. In 1969, I was 18, I knew virtually nothing, I had read The Well of Loneliness. I was always out as a lesbian from the age of 15, but I didn't know what was going on in the world. And I was at LSE, because I'd fallen in love with a woman in London, so I decided to study in London. And I walked down the corridor, and I saw a poster on the side of the corridor saying, "First meeting, Gay Liberation Front." And the words, I had to translate them. Gay, I think that means homosexual, doesn't it? And liberation is about freedom, and front sounds a military thing. I thought, I've got to be there. And so I went to this first meeting, and the first meeting of the Gay Liberation Front at LSE, there were 20 people, 19 gay men and me. I knew nothing. I had no political awareness. I had no background in political history, so I had difficulty following what was going on, but they voted me onto the steering committee because I was the only woman. And I remember one moment very, very clearly at which somebody said, "We should invite women's liberation." And another man replied, "Yes, they can bring sandwiches and coffee." And that moment stayed with me. I thought, right, okay, we're going to find misogyny here. There are some gay men who are really very passionately, have passionate solidarity with lesbians and with women in general, and there are a lot, unfortunately, who don't. And so there I was as on the steering committee, and I even was the first spokesperson at our first march, our demonstration or rally at Highbury Fields. So this was the first time we went out into the street, and it's hard to convey what it was like to be out there, gays and lesbians, saying we are gay and lesbian. It was the first time this had happened. Alongside us, there were people looking on in disgust. These perverts are out there, just really openly saying what they are. You saw the feelings the expressions of disgust on the people's faces. And I was for reasons I can't even remember why, I was the spokesperson, and a little group of journalists surrounded me, and I kept interrogating them. I said, what are you from? News of the World. What are you from? The Times. Oh, hello, Mr. Times, I said. This was Geoffrey Wunsell, and he interviewed me. And the only quote he took from whatever rambling thing I said was, "It is important to know that we are not ashamed to be homosexual." And that was, you can see the newspaper article from November 1970. And I always thought that was, later I thought, what a timid thing to say, we're not ashamed to be homosexual. But today, actually, it has now become again a revolutionary thing to say. I recently looked at that manifesto again, just to check there weren't any trans people in it, and there really weren't. And I was very struck by the fact that there was a strong commitment to working with the women's movement, but a kind of arrogant assumption as to what women wanted, which was to get rid of the nuclear family, and to get rid of the burden of childbearing. For instance, soon we'll have artificial wombs so that women will no longer have to be pregnant and give birth, which was a mad idea. At the time, I was very politically naive, and I don't think I understood much of the implications of this. But now I can see that this idea that we have to free women from childbirth was basically a kind of contempt for women's biology, for the fact of pregnancy and childbirth and all the positive things that may be associated with pregnancy and childbirth. It isn't simply a messy burdensome procedure. I later had 2 children, which is one of the maybe actually the best part of my life. And it is a miracle. And the idea that women want to be freed from pregnancy and childbirth is a ridiculous notion. It's really quite misogynistic. Another thing that I didn't realise at the time, which was we needed to free women from taking care of their own children, and children would be owned collectively or raised collectively. There was always something slightly dodgy about that. And of course, I learnt much, much later that there had been part of the gay liberation movement which thought that children needed to be liberated as well. And children's liberation was at that time a very suspect concept, and still is, of course, because the idea that children needed to be liberated involved child sexuality being liberated. And I didn't know anything about this at the time. I discovered this much later, to my horror, that part of the movement had embraced that. I was studying maths, and I gradually became aware that I knew nothing about the world. And in GLF that became very obvious. I knew nothing about the world, and I needed to start life again. And I asked my tutor, John Bell, where I should go. I was thinking of Australia, because it was a long way away. And he said, no, if you have to leave, then go to somewhere nice like Amsterdam. And that's what I did. What was extraordinary about going from England, where I had seen people disgusted about homosexuality, to Amsterdam, was that suddenly it was as if I was 20 years ahead, that we'd freed gay and lesbians, and we were fine. My first job was drying dishes at an exhibition centre, and I was working on the conveyor belt opposite an old lady. Seemed old to me at the time. She was probably in her 50s or 60s. And she said in a conversational tone to me, "Have you got a boyfriend?" And I said, "No, I prefer women," in this kind of defiant tone I was used to being, I expected aggression, I expected rejection. And she said, "Oh, really? Okay, have you got a girlfriend?" in this perfectly neutral, pleasant tone of voice. And at that point I thought, my God, I'm staying here. I was always out as a lesbian. It was never really a problem. I had children. My children went to school. They never experienced any problems. I was raising my children with another woman. They never had any problems. It was as if everything was solved. Holland, of course, you know, was the first country in the world to legalise gay marriage in the year 2000. And I just thought that everything's done and dusted. And it was only much, much later, in 2016, that I suddenly started reading things which I found disturbing. And I thought, wait a minute, what's happening? I was reading that supposedly feminine boys, minors, so teenagers, were wanting to have sex changes. And I thought, this is bizarre. They want to have bits chopped off their bodies and they're just children. I thought it was really disturbing. And I mentioned in a group of friends, and then I thought, I wonder if girls are doing it as well. And then I discovered that not only were girls taking puberty blockers and using binders to compress their breasts and trying to get on testosterone, and wanting later even maybe to have fake phalluses, that was the majority, that the majority of kids going to these gender clinics were girls. And then I got really upset. I thought, because these are girls like me. They thought they were boys. I thought I was a boy. And instead of getting used to gradually realising it's fine to be a masculine girl, it's fine to be a lesbian, these are perfectly fine things. Instead of that, they're going for medicalization, and they're being encouraged to do so. And the more research I did, the more horrified I became that not only were they being encouraged online and by their peers to do this, but the whole medical profession seems to be colluding in this mad notion that masculine girls, girls who were unhappy with their bodies, which is most teenage girls, by the way, that girls who were unhappy with their bodies, it's fine, they have agency, they have bodily autonomy, that's what they have. And bodily autonomy, that is a buzzword which reminds me now of the children's rights, children's liberation, bodily autonomy, children's liberation. It's the same idea. Instead of child safeguarding, protecting children from doing things they may regret, now it's all, no, let children do what they want. Children have their own sexuality. They need to explore. They have their own agency. Let them be, and let them take all these drugs which will ruin their bodies and their lives. And it made me angrier and angrier. And I thought, this is undoing the work we did in gay liberation. I contacted Stonewall and tried to get them to understand. And then in the spring of 2019, I met Kate Harris, who was doing the same thing. We had different backgrounds. My background was gay liberation. Her background was more in Stonewall. And we had the same concerns about the fact that lesbians were being, in particular, were suffering from this new trend. And we didn't want to start a new organisation. We thought that Stonewall is there. If we could get Stonewall to change and to realise it was on the wrong path, that would be better. But they wouldn't engage with us. They wouldn't listen to us. It was the era of no debate. Nothing we said was taken seriously. I was invited to take part in a panel to commemorate the 49th anniversary of the founding of the Gay Liberation Front, because I was the only member of the original steering committee they could find. I was the only woman invited on the panel, and I said, that's not right, let's have another woman. I made a couple of suggestions, which were rejected, and then I heard that another woman was to be added, and I researched her. I researched what she had been doing in the 1970s. And to my shock, I discovered lots of articles which were published in 2014, which showed that she had been an important officer of the NCCL, the predecessor of Liberty, and that she had used that function to promote the paedophile information exchange. She was very closely associated with the chairman of PI and had even edited his book. And I thought, this is extraordinary. That's what she was doing in the 1970s? Well, everybody was mad. Lots of people were mad in the 1970s. And then I discovered in 1993 she had written a chapter in a book advocating the complete abolition of the age of consent. I found this profoundly disturbing, and I assumed that she now regretted all this stuff that she had written decades earlier. And I wrote to her asking her how she had changed her mind and when and what she felt about it. She wouldn't answer, and in fact she said, "There's nothing to worry about." And I wrote back, I said, "What do you mean there's nothing to worry about?" And then she wouldn't reply to me anymore. After that, I wrote all this to the moderator, and within an hour, the event was cancelled. And when it fell through, I said to Kate, why don't we just have our own meeting? And that was going to be the meeting, that was the meeting at which LGB Alliance was formed. And we spent 3 months finding people we thought we knew would agree with us, and we spoke to each person individually. It took hours and hours every day, and we eventually had a meeting at Conway Hall on the 22nd of October 2019 with 70 people who were aligned with our views.
I'll see if I can do this without crying. It's my great pleasure to introduce Bev Jackson and Kate Harris.
We are the future for evidence-based policy making as it affects LGB people and as it affects children.
Thank you to everyone here and also to all our supporters around the world, because we know that they're with us in spirit. Thank you. Today's LGBTQ plus movement does not want to acknowledge the mistakes that were made in the past about child liberation, or what they want to call it, and in fact is, in some parts of it, is repeating those same mistakes today. So when I think about child safeguarding, I think partly of my own childhood and how glad I am that nobody tampered with it and tried to suggest I needed drugs, and the children I raised myself, and how children develop and change as they grow older. It seems to me that child safeguarding is essential. And when we're talking about gay liberation, we're talking about adults who should be free to form their own relationships, and as teenagers gradually evolve in their sexual orientation, they should have role models who encourage them to understand that it's fine to be gay or lesbian. And safeguarding means protecting them from bad actors, and also protecting them from taking irreversible decisions and tampering with their bodies, and especially from thinking there's something wrong with their bodies. I think LGB Alliance was a profoundly significant actor, because what we did was we disrupted the narrative. Before LGB Alliance was formed, if you cast doubt on people's the idea that everybody has a gender identity, you were called homophobic, because all the legacy gay rights organisations, which are now, I call them, TQ plus organisations, they all have embraced gender identity, which I think is a misogynistic, sexist concept. And we said, no, we're gays and lesbians and bisexuals, and we reject the notion of gender identity. We understand what homosexuality is. It has to do with, having sex with people of the same sex, not gender, which is some imagined thing that some people say they have. And suddenly we freed up people to say, yes, we also actually think this gender identity stuff is nonsense. And they couldn't be called homophobic anymore. One thing that continues to disturb me is the false narrative that that opposing gender identity or standing up for LGB rights and saying LGB has to separate from TQ+, that is at the moment, unfortunately, associated with the right wing. And it is not a right-wing belief that homosexuality is about sex, not gender. But unfortunately, that is how it is perceived, especially in the United States, but also to some extent still in the UK. The UK is ground zero for fighting back against the gender identity nonsense, which has really disrupted the gay rights movement and is a very regressive idea. We have fought back in the UK because we have managed to get the subject discussed in the media and in public life. And that has been almost impossible everywhere else. And so we have led the way, and I'm very proud of that. In America, it's still highly polarized along political divides. So what I really hope is that that polarization can be broken down, because most people know child safeguarding matters. We know that homosexuality is about people of the same sex, not gender. And once we can break through that polarization, I think that we will gradually find our way back to a place in which gays and lesbians and bisexuals can feel free to express their sexuality as adults, and that we will regain the importance of child safeguarding.